What is going on, gunfighters? So if you care about the life of the host, right now I'm the host of the coronavirus version 2.0 for me, recovering from perhaps the worst sore throat I've ever had. But the world doesn't revolve around me. I'm still trying to get you guys some good content. I was looking back through the archives and I saw that I had done an episode on the M17 and the M9, and I thought it may be beneficial to do that in a single episode. So the plan is to take parts of both those episodes and then at the end give some thoughts and some comparisons on the two guns. If you want to check out the website while you're listening, goodshepherdtraining.com. Again, that's goodshepherdtraining.com. There's also some cool merchandise on there if you want to check that out as well. So, who am I? Who is this person talking to you from across the internet? Why should you listen? First and foremost, I am a Christian, a servant of God, and a follower of Jesus Christ. God has blessed me to do many things in my life, for I could do nothing apart from Him. U.S. Marine Corps combat veteran, did a couple of tours in Iraq. As an assaultman after my combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. Also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Also did several years in law enforcement, LAPD. I worked regular assignments and more specialized assignments. Been a private contractor for a 3-letter government agency. That's all I'll say about that. Been blessed to be a state rifle and pistol champion and West Coast regional rifle champion. Won more shooting competitions with the talent that God's given me than I can actually remember. Was blessed to be the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. Our primary job, the reason we primarily existed, was to stop active shooters. I got the opportunity to head up and be the commander of that team. I grew up around guns, hunting and shooting and competing at a very early age. Been blessed to hunt all over this beautiful country, from whitetail on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast, and bear and elk and all manner of things. I've even been a professional big game hunter and guide. But again, most importantly, I'm a Christian. And I am your host, Michael Melito. Welcome to the podcast. The Beretta M9 and Beretta 92. What I believe to be the best combat handgun of all time. Also, before we transition away from the bio, I do want to mention that I did carry the M9. I carried it during war. I carried it fighting a war. So there's some real-world first-hand experience there on the M9. I've also obviously used it as a civilian. I've used it for training and things like that. Why do I think that the Beretta M9, Beretta 92 is the best of all time? I know people say the GOAT, the greatest of all time, but I'm going to say BOAT, the best of all time. Why? Because the best of all time. Why do I think that? Why do I think that the Beretta is the ultimate combat handgun? Notice I said greatest combat handgun of all time. I chose that phrase carefully. I did not say the greatest handgun of all time. I did not say the greatest concealed carry handgun of all time. I did not say the greatest law enforcement handgun of all time. I said the greatest combat handgun of all time. Having been a U.S. Marine Corps combat veteran, having been in law enforcement with LAPD, and having for years and years and years carried and trained people as a concealed carry, both instructor and somebody who conceal carries himself. They are different. I didn't say that the Beretta was best for that. I said combat handgun. Combat and CCW are different. Combat and law enforcement is different. As much as we kind of see our law enforcement transitioning and becoming more militarized, I would submit to you that it's a different role. It's a different environment. It has different needs. It has different mission parameters. In concealed carry, a defensive handgun encounter, a few seconds is a long encounter. Most defensive handgun shootings for civilians and law enforcement, I believe, are start and finished within 3 seconds. So a brief aside, check yourself if you see yourself in some kind of crazy John Wick scenario. From the time you draw that handgun, hopefully justifiably, and the last time you pull that trigger is probably a few seconds. Now, there are outliers, I realize that. But look at combat for a Marine, for a soldier. That often doesn't last seconds. It lasts minutes or hours. Or hours, day after day after day. That's a different environment. It has different mission parameters. A good CCW handgun, to use a common term, needs to be able to go from 0 to 60 real fast. You have to get that gun from completely, generally concealed and in a safe holster position to inaction quickly if you want to resolve the majority of defensive civilian handgun encounters and still be breathing. Combat is different. Combat, a lot of times, hopefully almost all the time, you'll be in at least a fire team, hopefully a squad, maybe a platoon. And in general, if you're carrying a handgun, you're not the point man. You're not the lead guy. You're carrying a handgun, you might be carrying a machine gun. And if that's the case, you're probably not in the front of the stack. If you're like me, I was an assaultman infantry specialized in demolitions, I might be carrying a satchel charge. I might be carrying C4. I might be carrying a rocket launcher, a shoulder-fire multi-purpose assault weapon with a couple of different rounds for blowing up light armored vehicles, for blowing up bunkers or machine gun nests or whatever. And I'll have the handgun on me. If things start getting hairy, I'm likely going to have a little bit more time to get that handgun out and get my first shot off. And once it's out, it's probably going to be out for a while. Again, different mission parameters. So make sure you realize that. Just like there's no greatest vehicle. Like a Honda Civic is probably great from going to the suburbs to going to your house every day. But it's not great if you're hauling gravel. An F-150 would be much better. Different mission parameters. Likewise, a combat handgun is different than CCW. It's different than law enforcement. So why is it the best? Why is it better? I think to answer that, we should ask, how is it different? Because if it's no different, then it can't be any better. And I say that it is different in a lot of ways than almost all other modern handguns. If you look at a Glock and all its copiers, they have pretty much the same operating system. Polymer, striker fire, same tilting barrel. From the Glock to the 320 to a Smith & Wesson M&P, which I really like, to, let's get obscure, a Steyr, to even one of Beretta's newer handguns, I think their striker-fired plastic one is called the APX, an FN509. You look at those, and they may have a few different colors, they may have a few different finishes, but as far as function goes, and this may tick a lot of people off and a lot of people in the handgun world and industry, they're basically the same. You might find one that you like better, or you like a certain brand better, or maybe even more legitimate things like one points more naturally for you. It has a better grip angle for your ergonomics. It has controls that are more easily usable by you. And for you, that might make a difference, but for a mass issue to an army, that's not really a thing because you're going to have thousands and thousands of different troops with thousands of different ergonomics and hands and whatnot. But all those basically have the same operating system. Really. So let's look at how the Beretta differs. Well, it's very different in that it has an open top design. You look at, again, a Glock, an FN, an M&P, they basically all have the same design. Take all the slides and all the barrels and drop them on a table, they're pretty much the same. They have a little bit different fit and finish. The Glock may look like a 2x4 and the other one may be a little bit more rounded, but basically they're the same. The barrels fit in the same. They lock up the same. The Beretta has an open top design. If you've spent any kind of time driving a handgun, hard and fast, you'll know that quite a few malfunctions happen when you get brass somehow between the slide and the barrel. Call it a stovepipe, call it a double feed, call it failure to eject, failure to extract, all those things. Well, that Beretta open top design, I won't say eliminates it, I won't say it's impossible, but it's way, way less likely because there's less crap in the way. There's more open space to let that brass be free. Fly away, little brass. You know, there's more room to let that brass, once it's done its job and that weapon is fired, that brass can go a lot of different places and be out of your way. And as long as it's out of the gun, then who cares? So, rounds that may cause a malfunction in another platform generally won't cause a malfunction in a Beretta because of that open top design. Also, a great thing about that open top design is you have less reciprocating mass. And if you've ever, like I said, driven a gun hard and fast, less reciprocating mass on the top helps you shoot faster. And you'll see this in a lot of competition handguns. The handgun I've won the most competitions with is a Smith & Wesson M&P. And I've had the top cut out of it. And most competitions like the Glock 34, all the older generations, they have a big cut in the top of the slide. Why? Because you reduce mass and you have less mass slamming backwards and forwards. And I don't care how well you can control recoil. If you can reduce that recoil, you can shoot faster. That's just a reality. And the Beretta open top design does that while giving you more reliability. Let's talk about another thing that people see as a detriment, but I really, really like. The Beretta trigger is phenomenal. It is elegant. It is smooth. A lot of people today confuse light with good. Light does not mean good. Light just means light. You can have a very light, horrible trigger. I liken the best trigger as a good 1911 trigger. I describe that as like breaking a glass rod. Like just snap and it's done. I liken a Glock trigger to dragging a piano down a dirt road. It's just gritty and grindy and you never really know what's going to happen next. And then eventually it just breaks. Well, if I cut the weight of that piano in half and drag it down a dirt road, it still sucks. It's just lighter. It's just less of a burden, but it's still not good. The Beretta trigger, I like it. It's smooth, it's elegant, it's refined, it's predictable. It's a nice trigger, especially for a combat trigger. I'll be honest, do I think the double single action is the best for concealed carry? No, I don't. Do I think it's the best for a lot of situations? No, I don't. But it has a lot of merit in a combat situation where I might draw that gun out because I hear shooting 2 blocks away and I'm running into the gunfire as we do as Marines. I might trip and fall. I might do all kinds of weird stuff. I might have to crawl through a window. And I want kind of that first trigger pull to be a good long double action trigger pull. Again, it's a different world. If I'm literally sprinting up a gravel hill to get a good fire and maneuver position on my enemy, I don't necessarily want a super light trigger on that gun. Guess what? If I do, I can reach up and cock the hammer. And then the Beretta, from the first shot to the last shot, has a beautiful, crisp, single action, amazing trigger. Better than almost all. I'll say almost all, because you could probably find, that tactical unicorn, but almost all striker fire triggers. And you're talking about a combat military issued handgun. So what most people would consider a detriment, I consider a plus. The trigger is good. It is a good trigger. Is it great? Is it a 1911 trigger? No, but it's a good trigger. Here's another one that I really like and I appreciate. As a person that is semi-nomadic and moves around a lot and does stuff in all kinds of different environments, and, I'm a survivalist, a prepper. The Beretta is the only common handgun I know. It's not the only, but it's the only common handgun I know with a chrome-lined barrel. Just like a machine gun. Just like a lot of other military guns. It has a chrome-lined barrel. A lot of benefits to this. It does give the barrel more longevity, which, to be fair, most people are never going to shoot out a pistol barrel. It also gives the added benefit of really, really good corrosion resistance in saltwater and maritime environments. We did a whole episode on maritime guns. This gun has a chrome-lined barrel. It's a fantastic barrel for adverse conditions and adverse environments. And again, you get it just stock with a Beretta 92, a Beretta, M9. It has a chrome-lined barrel. You're talking about like a military-grade, chrome-lined, awesome barrel. And I saved my favorite for last. My favorite thing that differentiates this gun from almost all others, there may be other designs that use it, but none common, is that locking block design. Once you get good with a handgun, if you are mediocre with a handgun or a beginner with a handgun, this is going to probably make no difference to you. But once you get good with a handgun, I'm talking you can shoot an inch or two standing offhand at 25 yards. You can shoot a couple inches at 50 yards. This tilting barrel locking block design, I think, is superior to a regular, what I would consider every other Browning tilting barrel design, the simple tilting barrel and a slide. I think the locking block has a lot of merit. If you take your Glock in front of you and literally just start pulling the slide back, you'll see that barrel dramatically tilt up. If you do this with a Beretta, you will not see this happen. That barrel stays in line. It stays flat and the locking block drops away. Well, who cares? Well, I care. Because I don't care how good your ammunition is, you will have deviation. Most people will refer to it as standard deviation, which meaning there'll be a different velocity for every round. And when that gun starts to unlock and that barrel lifts up, or even starts to tilt up, that's going to affect it. Theoretically, if all your ammo is exactly the same, it wouldn't matter. But since there's little bits of deviation, it does matter. Those rounds can shoot drastically different. And I say drastically, we're talking a noticeable difference at 25 to 50 yards. And most people would say, who cares about that? Well, I care about that. This is one of the reasons I think the Berettas are one of the most accurate out-of-the-box handguns without getting some kind of crazy custom build. They are fantastically accurate. Another big benefit, if you've ever lived through an ammo shortage, which if you're listening, you have. If you can comprehend the words that I'm saying, you've lived through the past 3 years and you've lived through ammo shortages. Now, you should always test. I'm big, if you listen, I'm big on testing. The number one criteria for your carry ammo, I'd say number two. Number one, make sure it actually fires. But number two, make sure it shoots the same place as your training ammo. Because who cares how good it performs in terminal ballistics if you don't hit the target? That's a moot point. The Beretta, since that barrel doesn't tilt up, in my experience, and I am not a physicist, but in my experience, it will shoot most loads same point of aim, point of impact. And again, I think it's because that barrel doesn't tilt up. Or it's just ridiculously accurate anyway. I don't know, but I have to believe that has something to do with it. So you still need to test it, but I'm much more likely to find a 115 grain load that hits in the same place as, let's say, my carry 124 grain Spear Gold Dot. That's a big advantage. I like that locking block design. I think it is superior than all the other common handgun designs that we have. So that's how it's different than most modern handguns and how I think it's better for a lot of things. Also, not to be overlooked is the fact that you get a long lineage. We think of the Beretta as you know, coming out in the 80s, that's when it was big. That was when it was on Die Hard and Lethal Weapon, and that's when the U.S. military adopted it. But it's really, if you look back at the history, and I'm not Ian from Forgotten Weapons, but if you look at the lineage of the Beretta, you can see that it's a slow change of good features and adaptations over time. And that's a good thing for the end shooter. You get to reap all the benefits of all those decades and decades of wars fought with those similar handguns and lessons learned and craftsmanship. And you get all that in the Beretta. And I'm probably going to get a lot of haters for this next part. But as, you know, the modern day philosopher Taylor Swift says, haters gonna hate and hate. But you just got to shake it off. But anyway, Glock, as far as I understand, and I read a book about the early adoption of the Glock in America and things, and he was not a handgun guy. He made curtain rods and other things and injection molded plastic. But he wanted to figure out how to make a gun cheap and effective that worked. And to be totally fair, he did that. He nailed it. He made a cheap, effective gun that works. But I want a little bit more than that. You heard my bio, I've been a professional big game hunter and guide. I can totally I can skin, gut, and butcher an elk with a machete. It'll totally work, and it almost certainly won't break. It'll be 100% reliable. But I want something that will work while also being elegant and refined and more efficient. I would rather have a buck 110 slim or a buck 110, just a regular old buck 110. It's elegant, it's beautiful, it's still rugged, it still works well. I don't know if I remember the exact quote from Star Wars. I like Star Wars, I'm not a Star Wars nerd, but it's a more elegant weapon from a more civilized age. One of the last benefits, the Beretta 92, it just looks good. Let's be honest. You set that next to a Glock. Just pick out random people that aren't adverse to guns. They don't have hoplophobia. They're not averse to weapons. They're not scared by them, but they're not gun people. And you just set down a Beretta and then a Glock next to it and have 10 random people walk by and ask them which one they think looks better. What do you think the answer is going to be? The Beretta. You know, as one of the guys I served with in Iraq said, it's not a war crime to look good. And I don't often tell war stories, but I'll tell this one because it's funny and it's not gruesome or anything. But we had all kinds of packing lists and all kinds of gear, and we were so weighed down with gear going to Iraq. But you know, one thing a lot of us didn't have, oddly enough, going to Iraq? Sunglasses. So when we got there, we had to buy a lot of times what we could get off the locals. And there's one guy in our platoon, weapons platoon, we got what we could get, and he got the opposite of tactical sunglasses. If you know, tactical Oakleys are on one end of the spectrum, and Elton John glasses were on the complete other end. These were pretty far away from the tactical sunglasses, and people were ragging him about it. And with a dead serious face, and he was a big hulk of a man. He turns around in formation and says, "It's not a war crime to look good." It's just, I still remember it, and in a pretty sad, miserable time, that's a pretty funny memory to remember. But anyway, it's not a war crime to look good, and just because the Beretta looks good doesn't mean it won't perform. I mean, Ferraris look good, and they're fast. So now that I've extolled the virtues of the M9 Beretta 92, let's talk about some cool variants. Now let's say that you have filet mignon taste, but you are on a ramen noodle budget. Let's talk about some of the cheaper versions. Taurus makes copies, I believe licensed copies of the Beretta 92. They have for a long time. While I don't think they're the same quality, I don't think they have a chrome-lined barrel or things like that, they still benefit from a lot of those features, and I think they may have even been made on the same machines or to the same specifications. So the Taurus, much like a Taurus copy of a Smith & Wesson. Is it a Smith & Wesson? No, but does that make it a bad gun? Not necessarily. I don't have first-hand experience running a Taurus, so I'm not going to comment on that, but I know they exist. You may find the next one for even cheaper. It's an Egyptian version of the Beretta. I believe it's Egyptian, called the Helwan. I've seen one of these once in person. I didn't really know what it was when I saw it. I'm not a gun collector, but I think you can get these for really good prices. At least you could back in the day. I don't know if they've become a collector's item. The Helwan Egyptian M9 variant. You may find one of these in a little tiny gun shop that somebody, doesn't want a lot for it because it's just an obscure gun. Again, I can't speak to how good a quality those are, but it has a lot of the same design features and perhaps a lot of the benefits. And I believe the Helwans are a single stack, so it might make a fine CCW gun. Again, I don't know firsthand. Now, your real common one is just going to be your Beretta 92 FS and your M9. And there are some really minor differences in literally the markings they put on the gun. But as far as I know, all the specifications and everything from the M9 and the 92 FS are literally the same, except for markings. I don't think you get a cheaper version if one doesn't say M9 and one says 92. I think they're, from what I understand, basically the exact same gun with different markings. Next, the A1, which I think corrects some of the drawbacks of the Beretta 92, and let's be fair, it came out in the 80s. But the A1's going to have a rail, and it's going to have changeable sights instead of that fixed front sight. And they do make sights that bolt over top of that, but the A1, at least all the ones that I know of, have just a dovetailed front and rear sight like a lot of other modern guns do. So you can change the sights out if you want tritium night sights or, let's say, the fiber optic sights. I do believe the M9A1 is what the Marine Corps went to, which will bring you into the A3 and the A4. Now, the A3 is the one that did not win the last handgun trial contract. I won't get into that. That may be a whole nother episode for a whole other day, whether that was the right decision or not. Anyway, the A3 and the A4, and I believe the difference there, I believe the only difference there is one lets you mount optics. It has an optics-ready slide, which in today's day and age is a thing. I have started running optics, and I have for quite a while now, and I have to concede they are better. They do give a real advantage in not all, but most scenarios. The A4, again, I believe is the A3 with the ability to mount optics. Whether it has any other modifications, I don't know. They also make the Beretta 92Xs, which are kind of like the civilian black concealed carry version. I think they have standard size and compact size. If you don't know the compact size, like the Glock 19 version of a Beretta 92, and that compact size is generally referred to as a Centurion. If you want something a little bit smaller, there you go. But they make those in the X, and I believe the X stands for being able to mount optics. A couple of other really cool variants. The Enox, we talked about the corrosion resistance of the Beretta barrel. Well, if you want a much more corrosion resistance overall, they make the Enox, which is like the stainless steel. Oh, because it looks pretty much all silver. It looks like a silver gun versus a black gun. And the Enoxes are cool. I think they look really good. And then they also make the Wilson Combat Beretta 92, which is a Brigadier version, which is generally supposed to shoot a little bit better. They are fantastic guns. And then Langdon Tactical is kind of known today for making custom Beretta 92s, keeping them kind of alive in today's tactical market. I don't have any first-hand experience with those, but they sure look good on Instagram. But since I've never test-driven one, I can't speak to it firsthand. But those are some pretty cool variants of the Beretta 92. Alright, with that, that's pretty much going to conclude the main topic for today's episode. I hope you liked it. I hope you enjoyed it. Whether or not you agree with me, you may totally disagree with me. You may totally think that the Glock 19 is the best combat handgun of all time. And that's fine. You're totally within your abilities to have your own opinions. I don't think that everybody listens to this should agree with me all the time. I'm not that vain. But hopefully you listen to this with an honest and open mind, and are at least open to the things that I said in this episode. If you want to politely post your favorite or best, what you would submit is the best combat handgun of all time. Listening on iTunes, you can scroll down and write it in a comment. Say, good podcast, but I disagree. The whatever is the best of all time. And then me and a bunch of other people can see it. Feel free to do that. Talked about in the beginning this being a virtual tribe. If you want to be in the inner circle, the cool kids, there's a Patreon chat on there. It used to be $1 a month. Recently, I think Patreon changed their thing. I think it has to be $5 a month now. With inflation, that probably a fraction of what it was a year or two ago. It's certainly the fraction of the cost of a box of 9mm ammo anywhere I know where you can get 9mm ammo. So the fraction of a cost of a box of ammo, you can sign up and be part of the cool kid group in the inner tribe. We talk about stuff like this all the time. In fact, this episode came from one of the patrons. They said, hey, have you done an episode on this? And you know what? I talk about the Beretta 92 sometimes, but I have never done a full episode. So you can thank them if you liked it. If not, you can sign up and tell them why it was a stupid idea and the Beretta sucks. That's up to you. But if you want to be part of that inner tribe, again, go to Patreon. There'll be a link in the notes. Talk about all kinds of cool stuff on there. And a lot of times, hopefully, stuff more important than guns. Tactical tip of the day. Hey, you guys remember COVID? What a crazy time that was. Anyway, today's tactical tip. You remember those old face masks? The blue ones? Anything like that? That kind of material. Also, the coffee filters. Things like that. If you're going to oil several guns or large guns, probably doesn't make sense for like something like a coffee filter or one of those face masks you had just lying around. Spraying that with some oil, lubricant, and wiping down your guns to work really well because it doesn't leave a bunch of crud behind. If you use just a regular paper towel, which you can do, and I certainly do, because it's easy and it's handy, a lot of times it'll leave residue behind. Coffee filter, one of those old diaper face mask things, is not going to do that. Let's say you're wiping down a bunch of guns, went to the range, whatever, spraying one of those face masks with some REM oil, dumping some oil on it, is likely going to do a better job on a face mask, on a coffee filter, than on just a paper towel. And you might have a bunch of those laying around, because it was a thing for a while. So that's your tactical tip of the day. Tactical verse of the day is from Ezekiel. Therefore, son of man, prophesy, and strike your hands together. The third time, let the sword do double damage. It is the sword that slays, the sword that slays the great men, that enters their private chambers. I have set the point of the sword against all their gates, that the heart may melt, and many may stumble. Ah, it is made bright, it is grasped for slaughter. So hopefully you enjoyed that on the M9. Now let's restart on the M17. I hope you'll consider becoming a patron. I'm not going to infomercial you guys and tell you how awesome it is. However, patrons, they get a lot of really cool insider content, stuff that just goes out to the patrons, training videos and whatnot. They also get to be, some of the patrons that choose to, we get to be part of an insider chat, and it's a blessing to all of us. We get to help each other. You know, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. We get to help out each other. There's a lot of men on there that know a lot more than I do about tons of different subjects, and it's great to have their expertise. It's also great to just have that tribal camaraderie with like-minded men. It's really nice to have. So if you want to be part of that insider chat, or you want some of the insider content, or you just want to support the podcast, to step up and say thanks, consider becoming a patron. There should be a link in the show notes. With that, the M17. The M17. Oh, the M17. How I long for the days of the M9 Beretta, and lament her passing. Now, if you know, because you've listened for any length of time, in fact, we just did an episode last week, but I've said it long before that, I think the M9, the Beretta 92, is the finest combat handgun ever fielded. Period. So obviously I can't think that about the M17. Now, we talked about a love-hate relationship in the intro. I'm going to start with the hate part, and then hopefully we end on a better note, the love part. Let me say that most things I have against the SIG M17 really have nothing against the platform, the actual gun. To be fair, I think a large portion of why the military went to the M17 is they're getting it at $209 at cost. I'm not saying cost is not important. I'm not saying that I want tax dollars wasted, but I'm saying when you look at all the millions and millions of dollars, what one fighter jet or development of one fighter jet program costs or one aircraft carrier, I'd submit that handgun that our U.S. Marines and soldiers are carrying into combat maybe is not a place to pinch pennies, but I also pay taxes, so I get it. But I will submit this question: did we pick the best tool for the job or the cheapest tool that would get the job done? Did we pick the Snap-on wrench or the Harbor Freight wrench? And another reason that may surprise you if you listen for any length of time, know that I'm not the biggest fan of Glocks. But I honestly think for this role, the Glock would have been a better choice. I know some of you just fell back in your chairs if you've listened for any length of time. I've never said the Glock is a horrible handgun. I'd say it's a very reliable, robust handgun that lacks elegance and fit and finish, but that's not super important when you're giving it to a tanker in the Army. A big reason I think that the SIG got the contract is the modularity. And I think that's kind of overplayed as somebody that's been in the U.S. Marine Corps and the U.S. Army. I know how the armory window works, per se, especially from the outside. I doubt they're going to say, hey, Private Smith, come here, let me measure your hands. Which grip module feels the best for you today in your life in your role as a machine gunner? They're likely going to do something like Private Smith's going to be walking up to the window after just getting yelled at for something he may or may not have done wrong, make him sign some kind of armory card with a serial number on it, and that handgun's going to be issued to him. I fail to see where in all but the most niche of circumstances that modularity is going to come into play. I just don't see it for the majority of soldiers and Marines. Perhaps the Air Force would do something like that. I've never served in the U.S. Air Force. If you can hear that ruckus in the background, that is my a little over, I think now, 110-pound, 11-month-old Rhodesian Ridgeback Alexander Hamilton, who has probably come to about the end of his patience for my podcasting today. So I don't think the modularity is as big a thing as it's being made out to be for the military. I'll get to more of that in the love part of this episode. Now, to give credit where credit is due, the Small Arms Solution channel, if you're not familiar with that, he did a whole thing on the recent contract and bidding and this new M17 going from the M9 to the M17. By the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter is established, so make sure you substantiate all the things in there if you're taking them as true. But it's a very interesting video, or I think maybe 2 videos. Anyway, very interesting if you just look up Small Arms Solution and M17. It gets into a lot of the minutia on the trials and contract of the M17. To be fair to the military, technology's come a long way since the 80s, and handgun technology, while I still think the Beretta 92 and M9 is a fine, elegant, and durable and reliable combat handgun, although not as elegant, I will concede that the Glock and the polymer striker fire platform is simpler and has more longevity, so it makes sense. That steel to aluminum slide to frame fit that I really like, and that full contact between the full length of the receiver rails and all that I like on the Beretta also wears down over time. The plastic frame has some significant benefits. I think that the military would not have had a bad choice if they had have chosen the either Glock 17 or 19 just across the board. Either one of those would have been fine. And again, I think a better choice, even though I don't personally like them, it's not about what I personally like. If I was looking at it to equip the U.S. Army, U.S. Marine Corps, all the branches, I probably would have went with the Glock 19, Glock 17. They are a proven, robust system. Nobody's going to argue with that. And again, the modularity, I just don't see that as being a thing for the average enlisted, soldier, Marine. And I have worked on both guns. I have been employed as a gunsmith as well. I don't generally talk about that in the bio. It's not germane, and I have to leave some things out of the bio, or else it would be an entire episode every time. But I have worked as a gunsmith. I have worked on both guns. The Glock 19 is simpler, in my opinion, to work on. It has, and I don't think this is my opinion, you can look up and see the number of moving parts in a Glock 19. Let's just pick one, a Glock, Gen 5, Glock 17 or 19, the number of moving parts in that versus an M17, M18. I do believe it has more moving parts. It is a more complex machine if you look at the way it's put together. It is cool that the fire control unit is modular, but it also seems to be far more complex to me than a Glock fire control system, which includes the frame. Even though it includes the frame, it seems to be, to me, far simpler. Simpler, especially in a combat gun, generally means better. Not always. Likewise, the upper, the slide, all those firing components seem to be simpler to me in a Glock and easier to work on than the SIG. Even so, let's transition here. I try not to be a Luddite. I try not to shun new technology just because it's new. Likewise, I don't want to embrace a new technology and go chasing after the new thing just because it's new. I don't assume that it's better. And I tried to embrace this. For a while, I was against red dots on a pistol. And then I thought, and I say red dots meaning optical handgun sights, not just a red dot. In fact, I don't believe any of mine on handguns are actually red dot sights. What does this have to do with the M17? I'm getting there. Give me a minute. Anyway, started training with these and running these, and I thought I have to concede after months of actually trying it for myself that these actually are better. Running a optic on a handgun actually is better. Not for every situation, but for a majority of realistic scenarios. It is better. It is faster. It is faster to get good quality, accurate hits. So I wanted a gun, did it out as I would advise you to do, and run one first on a 22 and get a bunch of training and trigger time in with it. And when I decided I was going to go to it, I wanted one in a centerfire defensive handgun. Well, I got a good deal, $400 and something on a slightly used M17. And as you probably know, the M17 is able to take optics. So I thought, Eureka. So I bought one and I ran it. And then I went from hate to love on this gun. I really do like it. I really do like it. I think just a simple M17 in its normal guise is fine. And while I don't like the modularity and think it's overblown in a military gun, I think you can overdo it if you're a new shooter, always chasing the next thing. I think if you're an intermediate to good to great handgun shooter, you can really take advantage of this modularity. I didn't change a ton on my M17, but I changed enough to make it work better for me. I like 1911s. I'm a 1911 guy. I put a flat face trigger in it. I didn't change the trigger pull or mechanism or anything. I literally just put a different geometry, a flat trigger face, SIG factory part on the fire control unit to give it a flat trigger. And I put a Wilson combat grip module on there because I think it's better than the M17 grip module. Not a huge difference, but noticeable to me. And more analogous to a 1911 that I like and I'm used to. And I mounted, obviously the reason I got it, I mounted a Trijicon RMR to it. And I really love that gun. It's a great gun. I don't particularly like polymer striker-fired handguns. But I will say, I take away the sentimental value of my Smith & Wesson M&P Pro that I've won more shooting competitions with than any other gun. Strip that away, I would say it's probably my favorite polymer striker-fire handgun. I do like it. I don't say it's a better choice for the military, but I do like it far better than my Glock 17. I do like that it's modular. I think for an end user, for a concealed carry person, or for somebody who's limited in the number of guns they can own either legally or can afford, it does have merit. There are new Glocks with the ability to mount optics, but I think that's kind of an afterthought. I've mounted quite a few optics. Again, I was employed as a gunsmith. I think that the SIG, whatever it is, the 320 or the M17s, They have a better optics mounting system. I think it was a forethought instead of just an afterthought. I think it's a better system. I should step back and say, I hope you appreciate that there's no sponsors on this show. You shall take no bribe. The Bible says you shall take no bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and twists the words of the righteous. When I was a younger man, I had sponsors. As you may have heard in the bio, I did quite a bit of competition shooting. If you want to be really good at competition shooting and at the top, kind of have to have sponsors, because that's got to be your full-time job. There's a reason I kind of stopped progressing in that. I don't want sponsors. I had SIG at one time reach out and give 6 handguns. Not to me specifically, but to a company that I was representing. They were the early 320s, and I'm talking, this may have been 10 years ago, 12 years ago, somewhere in there when the 320 first came out. And they sucked. They wouldn't run. I couldn't get them to run worth a darn, even regular factory ammo. I think we got 6 of them, maybe more, and they would just suck, to be flat out honest. Put a bad taste in my mouth, not just for the 320 that took years to get over, but for sponsorships in general. If something sucks, I want to be able to tell you guys. That's why it's important for you to support on Patreon. You get an honest opinion, not what somebody's paying me to put out on YouTube because they got for free and they're getting paid to say. But anyway, the early 320s had a lot of problems. Not just reliability, but the fact that they could drop and go off. Something that hadn't really been around since 1903. I'm aware of in any common, military handgun, police handgun. The fact that you could fall on it and have it shoot you, that's a big deal. And a big reason I advocate you guys not adopting something in the first couple of years it comes out. Don't be a beta tester in a gunfight. That's not the time to be a beta tester, guys. So that being said, I think that almost all the kinks are worked out of the 320 and were worked out long before the M17. And M18, if you don't know, the M18 is like the Glock 19 version of the Glock 17. The 17 is a full size. The M18 is what they would call a compact. It's still basically a full-size fighting handgun with a little bit shorter slide. But now that those are worked out and ironed out, and to be fair, a lot of guns when they first come out have issues. It's not unique to the 320. It's not like that's some crazy thing. Glocks have issues from time to time when they come out with a new model. Again, that's why I'm a big fan of not adopting something when it first comes out. Anyway, I think a lot of those bugs are worked out. I think for an end user, as a civilian, as a concealed carrier, even as law enforcement, where you kind of have control and dominion over your own gun in a lot of agencies, you can take advantage of the modularity, where you can mount a decent optic, where you do know what grip size is best for you. I think there's a lot of merit there. I think you get a lot. The fact that if I want to take a Dremel to the gun and make it fit me better because I know how, but if I screw it up, now $40 instead of $400 on a new frame or whatever, that's a big deal. The fact that the grip module is a not super expensive part of the gun, part that often gets modified, painted, Cerakoted, again, Dremeled, filed down, it's a big advantage. Not that I have any problem taking a Dremel to a more expensive gun. I've Dremeled, I think, all of my STIs, my 2 STIs, the first things I did because I know how I want them to fit me. But again, if you mess that up, that's a big deal. If you mess up Dremeling a Glock or an M&P, that's the serialized part of the gun. If you mess up Dremeling, a 320 or an M17, you just spend $40 and get another grip module, or $60, whatever it is with inflation, whatever it costs. It's not a couple of $100. That's a big advantage. A big reason I suspect, and I don't know this for sure, this is purely conjecture, this is not fact, but the trigger on the M17, the 320s, is probably one of the best polymer handgun triggers I have ever felt. Is it a 1911? No. Is it a single action SIG 226? No. But for a polymer striker fired handgun, it is a good trigger. Not great. If you want a great trigger, get a single action. But it is a good trigger. It's far better than a Glock trigger, in my opinion. And I think for the people testing it, that may have had something to do with it. And again, I don't know that is conjecture on my part. But just dry fire to the 2 handguns side to side. And that's a big deal. Now, if you're a civilian, you can just buy whatever aftermarket Timney trigger or whatever and drop it in your Glock and have a decent trigger. Or if you want to go the cheap route, a different connector and a different spring. But if you're in the military or law enforcement, You're not really supposed to do that, and you're probably not going to be allowed to do that. But having a good trigger out of the box, as they say, that's a big deal. And I think a big reason why it got adopted. And I think for polymer striker-fired handguns, I really can't think of any better. Would I have, if I was in charge of military procurement, picked it over the Glock? No, I would not have. Unless they're privy to some information that I'm not, which is totally possible. Would I now, as a civilian, as an end user, choose it over a Glock? I certainly would. I certainly think from the end user's point of view, it is a better gun. I certainly think in a civilian context that modularity has real merit and real advantages. I certainly think that the trigger pull is much better. Factory to factory gun is much better in a SIG 320 M17 than a Glock. Period, however you measure that. Unless somebody is so indoctrinated into the Glock cult that the Glock trigger is like the only one and they think that's the best. Any other person, you let them dry fire both guns and I think they'll concede that the 320 M17 trigger is better. And that's a big deal when you're shooting. Trigger control is a huge component of shooting well. So better for the military? I'd say probably not, which is why, again, I don't really like it. Better for you as the end user, as a civilian CCW carrier? I'd say probably, yeah. And although I don't think polymer striker-fired handguns are the best handguns, if you're going to carry a polymer striker-fired handgun, I can think of none better than the M17 / 320, M18, anything in that family. It's really, I can't think of a better endorsement than saying it is the best polymer striker-fired handgun I can think of. And if I take out sentimental, even better than the M&P, which would be probably my next pick. For a polymer striker-fired handgun, if that's what you want, that's what you've decided is the new tactical standard. If that's what you want, I can't think of anything better than the 320, M17, M18 family of guns. Anything in that kind of genus, suborder, whatever you want to call it. They call it personification if you give human attributes to things that aren't human. Do they have a word for if you give animal characteristics to things that are not alive? If there's a word for that and you know it, you should reach out to me and let me know what that is. Anyway, that's just how my brain's working right now. With that, I think that's a good place to transition out of the main topic. If you want to thank me for my service in a real way and you like the podcast, scroll down and hit some stars on Spotify, on iTunes. Super easy. Doesn't take a lot of time. Literally scroll down and hit some stars. If the platform lets you, write a review. If you want to support financially, because things like this aren't free to put out and produce, and because my Rhodesian Ridgeback Alexander Hamilton is a 110-pound dog and his food is not free, if you want to support, you can become a patron. And you can do that by clicking the link that should be in the show notes or going there via goodshepherdtraining.com. With that, thanks for staying tuned through all that and to the end of the episode. Usually at the end of an episode, not every time, but most times, I'll give you a tactical tip of the day. Tactical tip of the day: if you're going to run optics on your handgun, just like I recommend on a rifle, I really recommend that you have some form of co-witness. It really helps in the transition from traditional shooting iron sights to running an optic, and it also has the added tactical benefit if your optic goes out. Now, I'm a big advocate of running optics that don't take batteries. I like the Trijicon RMRs that don't take batteries, that are dependent on radiation. So they're not going to get too hot and stop working, or get too cold and stop working, or just have the battery go dead or whatever. But that's fine if you want to run one with a battery. But either way, even on mine, something could happen. It could stop working for whatever reason. Get a system, I don't care if it's on a 320 or on a Glock, where you can see, configure your fighting handgun, if it's just a training 22 or something, don't worry about it. But if you're going to trust your life to it, carry it on duty as a CCW, have some kind of co-witness system. Another big benefit to this I haven't heard really anybody talk about is I'll know if my optic loses 0 because I know how it lines up on my iron sights. If it gets knocked off or banged around, I'll be able to see either one of those is not in sync. And that synchronicity can be important. If you're dry firing every day, if one of those systems comes to be loose or off or loses 0, you should know just by looking at it. Something you might not be able to do if you don't have a co-witness system. So if you're going to start running an optic, whether it's on an M17 or even a Glock, consider doing the co-witness thing, guys. I think it has a lot of advantages. It's worth the extra scrutiny on choosing the system you're going to run an optic with. With that, let's get in a tactical verse of the day. Tactical verse of the day is going to come from Micah. What does the Lord require of you but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God? Men, gunfighters, seek justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. Have a blessed day. So, some pros and cons, some final thoughts. The operating system for the M17, that almost now ubiquitous polymer striker fired system, is easy to operate. It's easy to learn, and a good way to put it is to become proficient. It's going to take, for an equal amount of proficiency, generally more time to become as proficient on a double single action as in the Beretta, because it's two completely different trigger pulls. So it takes a long time. If you are a student of the gun, a student of the Cambat handgun, you'll know how important trigger press is in the fundamentals. And you kind of have to learn that twice and be able to transition between the two with a double single. I didn't say it was inferior, but I think that is a higher barrier to entry, if we can put it that way. That polymer striker fire is a simpler system. Also, I think that it is better for CCW. Notice I said that in the beginning, the Beretta 92 was the finest combat handgun. I don't generally carry one for CCW. I do often carry an M17 because it's a better CCW gun. I carry an M17 quite frequently with an RMR. Now, many of you would probably carry the M17 instead, but I think it's a better system for CCW. That's different than combat. In CCW, you may have to go from 0 to 60 real quick. And I think that striker fire design, while not as good as a single action, is superior to double single action. That is not my primary go-to carry gun, but it is a gun that I do carry quite frequently. It does have some advantages. One that's going to play into this is it has a polymer frame. I recently did a stint in Nebraska with long amounts of time in sub-zero temperatures. And that polymer has an advantage there when I'm out dry firing and shooting and grabbing the gun, right? It doesn't get nearly as cold. Also, moving from cold to hot environments, it doesn't sweat nearly as much as a metal frame gun. That may or may not apply to you, but it's definitely something, and one of the reasons I carried that gun when I was in that part of the country. Polymer does have advantages. You know, it is cheap and easy to make. It is light, and it does flex. You wouldn't think that a 9mm handgun recoils that much, but it does actually flex the frames a little bit from my understanding. And you can generally have a better recoil control because of that. I don't care how good you control recoil. If you can lessen that recoil, you can control it better and shoot faster. I think as an operating system, the Beretta M9 is better. It's superior. They do make single action only versions, and that probably would be my go-to carry gun when I was looking for one. However, to the best of my knowledge, they don't make a single action version that takes an optic, with an aluminum alloy frame. They do make the single action ones, but they are steel framed, which makes them far more heavy than I want to actually carry day to day. I carry a full-size fighting handgun every day, and I would have no problem carrying a Beretta 92, but I want to carry an optic. I've switched to optics, and I want to carry a single action only. Those steel frame Berettas weigh far too much. If they came out with one, or if they had one when I was looking for my go-to carry gun, I may have gotten their single action only if it had been an alloy frame and optics ready. Again, I don't think that double single is the best for me for concealed carry. But I think that operating system, that locking lug under the barrel design, that open top slide, I think that's a far better design. I think it's better than the traditional go-to Browning tilting barrel system. I think it's superior in a lot of ways. I think the Beretta is a more elegant gun from a really long lineage of good, well-developed handguns. I think it's a fantastic gun. I think that SIGs, that polymer design, and that fire control unit and everything, from what I understand, and I saw it or heard it from multiple sources, by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter is established. The Army was getting those for just over $200 a piece. So I think it will continue to be more popular, the same reason why a lot of people would choose a Glock over an STI. They'll say, well, I could buy 4 Glocks for, the cost of one STI, or maybe 6 Glocks for the cost of one STI. My answer to that would be, yeah, you can, and you'll get 1/4 of the gun. Or probably not, to be fair, but nowhere near the quality of gun that you'd get with a STI. But that's a real thing, for a lot of people. They get what they can afford, and they're more affordable. And there's nothing wrong with being affordable. Some people just like to buy a lot of guns. Some people will save up and buy the best gun they believe for the job. Just different philosophies. But if I'm going to trust my life to something, if it's not just a range toy or a safe toy, safe queen, I guess is the proper vernacular, right? If it's not that, then I want the best tool for the job. So I can only tell you what I've settled on. If you've listened, you know that I kind of have a unique approach to the bug-out bag system. I have my little small baby bug-out bag, bailout bag, that pretty much rides shotgun, or if I go somewhere like jump in the wife's car, it goes with me. I hope to usually keep it in sprinting distance. That's kind of the idea behind it. Anyway, for like my go-to fighting handgun for the peanut butter and chocolate hitting the fan, it's a Beretta 92 Wilson Cambat. Has been for a long time. That may change in the future, but that's what rides in that little bag. Because in that kind of environment, that's going to be different than CCW day to day. One of probably my secondary or tertiary carry gun is the M17 with the RMR. It's a good full-size fighting handgun. It's quite light for the size, and it's got a Trijicon RMR mounted on it. I've done quite a bit of training and shooting with that gun. I feel comfortable with it. That said, my go-to carry gun is a SIG 226 Legion single action only. And I don't think that's because the SIG 226 is superior to the Beretta 92, as the Navy SEALs choice might have you believe. It's because, unlike Beretta, they made a single action only, the SIG Legion single action only. They made it so it's a good balance of a full-size fighting handgun with an exquisite single action only trigger. That's a weight and size that I don't mind carrying on my hip day to day, every day. Hopefully that sheds some light on the Beretta M9 and the M17 platform guns. You've had 2 tactical tips in these episodes and 2 tactical verses. So I guess today I will close by saying, thank you. I am truly humbled that you give any of your time to this podcast and listen, and even more humbled by the men that choose to step up and support. Thanks, and have a blessed day.